Welcome to Modern Musings, Conversations with the Maiden, Mother, and Crone, where we look at ourselves and our world through the lens of the 21st century. Hi, and welcome back to this bonus episode of Modern Musings. I'm your host, Cindy Murray, and I'm here with Kristen Hessler and Amber Garvin.
Hello.
Hey.
And we are doing this bonus episode to cover our final two chapters in our read of Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And so we are on chapters 9 and 10. I can't believe we're finally at the end of this book.
Finally.
It's a really long book, and this is the second time I've read it. So about a year ago, I think, was when I finished this book before. So I'm really excited to cover these last two chapters because this is where all of the stuff really starts kind of coming together and making sense, although a lot of it made sense all along. If you are just now joining us and this is your first episode, no sweat. You can join us at any time and listen in. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. But if you'd really like to, I do encourage you to go back and check out those earlier episodes because there's a lot of information there, and it'll kind of help you understand where we're going with some of these things. And we'll probably refer to some of those earlier chapters, the topics that we covered there. So, but you can still get a lot out of it just by listening only to this episode. This chapter 9, was about your inner purpose. And that's something people have been struggling with from time immemorial. He starts out by saying that as soon as you rise above mere survival, the question of meaning and purpose becomes of paramount importance in your life. And I can say that's probably true. I think all humans have gone through that thought process. What is the purpose of my life? What is my life's purpose? And even, when we talked about, Kristen had a blog, I think, about artificial intelligence. And often when that is portrayed in science fiction, that is the AI's struggle, is what is my purpose? What is my purpose? Or its purpose becomes at odds with humans' purpose or whatever. So it's a constant struggle to reach that. And there is no substitute for finding your true purpose. You can, kind of enjoy your life on some levels, but there's always this underlying kind of question about what is your purpose. And Tolle tells us that you actually have an inner purpose and an outer purpose. And the trick is to make sure that your outer purpose is aligned with your inner purpose. And I don't know how many of us that is true for, but let's talk about what your inner purpose is. According to Eckhart Tolle, your inner purpose is to awaken, to be aware. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning in this book is what that awareness is. And according to him, awareness is presence, being conscious without thought, without labeling things, without putting a spin on it or whatever. Judging or whatever. You're just aware of what is. You're in the moment without thinking about the future, the past, or anything else. And you cannot make yourself awaken. If you try, then you wind up living up to an image that you or other people have of you. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, I want to be an awakened human being. And then immediately you imagine a guru.
What you think they look like.
Yes,
and
how they act. And you're trying to live into that image. And that is that's not authentic.
That's just your ego.
It is
defining itself.
It is. It's you're identifying with this form. And real awakening actually happens without thought. And he says, by grace, without doing anything. And I thought that was kind of interesting because you can't make yourself awaken, but you can suddenly realize that you are awakening. And he says actually that if you're reading this book, which I did, and something in you responds to it, then your awakening has begun. Okay?
Yeah, he mentions that in the first chapter, too.
Oh, yes, he did. I believe you're right. Yes, he did. And he said, if you just don't get it or this book is meaningless, then it has not started for you. If you read this book and you're just going, what the heck is he talking about? Or this is stupid, or I don't believe any of this, then it probably has not happened for you. But I can say that this book, I did struggle with it at the first. I was just like, man, this guy is just talking and talking and talking. And I'm like, it felt very wordy to me. I agreed with a lot of what he said, but it felt very wordy to me. But so it really wasn't until I got to these final chapters that I started going, whoa. And so he says that means that your awakening has begun. And for some, the awakening happens and they suddenly become aware of the thoughts that they habitually think. And I'm going to detour off of him for a second and talk about our one little word process, because one of the things that we talk about is the stories we tell ourselves.
Right.
And that is part of the awakening process, is when you realize that you are telling yourself these stories, these things that are not true.
Gaslighting yourself.
You're gaslighting yourself, or you've created the scenario in your head of what life is supposed to be like, or what
how someone wronged you,
how somebody wronged you, or what, just any of these things that you lived through in your life, and you're constantly replaying these things to yourself, and you base your actions and your life on these stories that you've told yourself. I am this way because this happened, or that person did this, or because I'm fat, or because I'm ugly, or because I'm fat. Oh, I said fat, didn't I? Well, that's what I tell myself all the time. Because I grew up poor, or whatever. If you are using those things, you tell those things to yourself, then those are the stories that you tell yourself. And once you are able to see that you are telling yourself these things, that is a sort of awakening. And that's what he's talking about. For some people, that's when they start to awaken. They can suddenly become aware of those thoughts, and they habitually think them. And we're talking about persistent negative thoughts, and they've been identifying with them, their whole lives. And once you realize that it's just a thought that I've identified with, then you are becoming aware. And you can, once you know that you're telling yourself those things, you can disidentify from those things. One of the examples that he gives, and this one was a hard one for me a few years ago, because a lot of mothers, particularly stay-at-home moms, they spend their whole lives raising their children, and they think that their purpose of their life is to raise their children. But then what happens when the kids are grown and move out, and maybe they don't even listen to you anymore, or whatever? What is your purpose then? So really, you're just identifying with that persona. It's part of the ego finding a way to identify itself, and you aren't awakened if that's what you're still doing. So, how that can't be your purpose, because it doesn't last. It's just another form. So he talks about if you aren't in alignment with your primary purpose, and I'll talk about that in a moment, then every purpose you come up with, even if it's creating heaven on earth, or serving such and such charity, or raising your children, it will always be of the ego, or it will be destroyed by time. It cannot hold up past time. Mm-hmm. So if you ignore your inner purpose, even if it looks like it's spiritual, your outer purpose will creep into how you do things, and that will become corrupted as well. So even if your purpose that you think is your purpose, even if it is spiritual in nature, it will eventually become corrupted, or time will cause it to go away. So, it's like the saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You can have all these good intentions for this purpose of your life, but unless it is aligned with your inner purpose, mm-hmm. it still is part of the ego. I thought that was really interesting, because I know, a lot of people say, I'm gonna do all this for this charity, but what they're really seeking out of contributing that charity is the recognition,
some
validation,
the validation, yeah. And so there's
right, that they did something good with their lives before they died.
Yes,
yeah,
and it really has nothing to do with that. So the whole point of your inner purpose is not that your aims or your actions are primary, but that your state of consciousness from where they come. So let me say that again. So he says this. So the whole point of your inner purpose is not that your aims or your actions are primary. Your inner purpose is not that your actions or aims are primary, but that the state of consciousness out of which they come. That is what your primary purpose is. So whenever you are being in the moment, and we've talked about this a lot, being fully present. If you are fully present when you are doing whatever it is, no matter how mundane it is, you negate time. And this is one of the things he talks about, negating time, because if you're fully present, you're not thinking about what's going to happen next. You're not thinking about what happened in the past, mm-hmm. right? So you're negating time. And when you negate time, you can negate the ego, because there is no ego in fully doing what you're doing right now. Because you're not thinking about what it's going to get you, mm-hmm. and you're not going to think about
or what you'd rather be doing,
or any of that. So whatever you are doing, you do it exceptionally well, because the doing is the focal point of your attention. Think about painters, great artists. When they are painting, they're not thinking about how they're going to sell the painting. They're not thinking about the last painting that they did. They are looking at this piece of artwork and just fully immersed in painting this portrait.
Writer's the same way. Like, you get writer's block when you're trying to fulfill a deadline, or your publisher saying you need to, write a story that fits this criteria by this certain time.
Right.
Then that's when you stop channeling that creativity.
Yes, you can only be creative if you're in the moment. Mm-hmm. Only in the moment.
Ooh, there's something about that.
And I'm going to get to that. Yeah. I am. But so he's talking about whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Give it your full attention, because then you are fully in that, and that negates time. It negates the ego. And he's talking about why your inner purpose is to be present. That is your inner purpose, to be fully present, be fully engaged in whatever it is you're doing, and thus negate time. Your outer purpose involves the future and cannot exist without time. So then you have to wonder, how do you make them work together? Because your outer purpose does involve time. But he says that outer purpose is always the secondary part of it. The primary is to be present. And if you become anxious or stressed while fulfilling your outer purpose, then your outer purpose has taken over. It has become primary. And you have just lost sight of your inner purpose. You've turned away from the present moment because you're stressed. Stress is always about the future. Mm-hmm. Always. You're worried about what's going to happen.
Or the past. And beating yourself up about something you said.
Beating yourself up, yes. So, and what has happened is you've actually thought that something else was more important than being in the moment. You forgot your main purpose, to be here now, fully present in whatever you're doing. Now, this doesn't... He goes on to talk about success. And I thought this was really interesting, because we talked about, you can't go work for the charity expecting to be successful or whatever, because that comes from the ego. And he also says, and this, I'm going to tell you, this comes from something else that I've talked about too. You cannot become successful. There is no such thing as I'm going to be successful. You can only be successful. It's not a future thing. What is actual success? That is providing quality in what you do. Success is a successful present moment. Success is never a future event. And the stress and negativity that you put yourself through trying to become successful will make you miserable the whole time you're doing it. The success itself is not worth being miserable. The end does not justify the means, because the means did not contribute to human happiness, then neither will the end. So working yourself to death at a miserable job cannot be in alignment with your inner purpose.
Right, because all that's going to happen is you're going to be in the future looking back and thinking that you wasted time.
You wasted time, or you're sitting there, I've got to get this goal, I got to work harder so I can make more money.
Chasing the next dream. Chasing
the next dream, whatever. And you're not fully giving to what is in the current moment. And when you realize your entire life's journey is the step you are taking this very moment, what you are doing right now, then you reconcile your outer and inner purpose. That they become the same, because there's always only this step. And so you give your fullest attention. And it's the step that is important, not the destination. The destination is always secondary. Going on a trip. Half the trip is getting there, right?
The journey.
The journey. Half the journey is getting there. That's an age-old saying.
It's not about the destination, but the journey.
It is. And, school, going to school is not about the graduation. The school is about all the learning that you've done in that process of going to school. And living your inner purpose is about what you are doing right now and being fully present in the moment and not worrying about what the future holds or whatever. And this whole, it always goes back to the topic of now, which, if you may remember, I chose it as my word of the year because of reading this book, because it just really resonated with me. And he talks about a lot of different things with that finding your inner purpose and stuff. When he starts talking about outer purpose, and then he says it actually varies from person to person, and it's temporary. And I can attest to the fact that I think that's true. It's subject to time, and it's always eventually replaced by some other purpose. Your outer purpose changes throughout your life, just based on your circumstances. I spent many, many years, the outer purpose of my life was to raise my children. And then the outer purpose of my life was to provide vacations for people, to help them provide the best vacation they could get or whatever. My current, I feel like, outer purpose is to share my voice through this podcast. And I try to fully be here 100% in the present moment whenever I'm working on this, because I feel like I'm fulfilling part of my purpose in doing that. And when you can find your inner purpose, then you can often find your outer purpose as well. In fact, he says that you can't discover what is right for you on an external level, your outer purpose, until you discover what works, what is compatible with your awakened consciousness. And you may have to find out what's not right, what no longer works, what is incompatible with your inner purpose. And I think that's what happened to me. And I think that's why this book resonated so much with me, because
you did ask for clarity.
I did. I asked for clarity in 2020. And then, and I instead of spending the year finding out what was important to me, I found out what was not important to me, and thus discovered what was important to me.
When you think about it, if you think about clarity, if your life is muddled down, if you pour it through a filter, you're removing the things
you're removing all the dirt, the junk,
important,
whatever, the things
that
contaminants,
are not important, the contaminants, yeah,
contaminants, and if you filter it enough, you come up with clear water, or whatever, and so and that really was what that year was for me, was filtering out all the things that I thought were not important. And some of that was just by dealing with things that I didn't want to be important, but they really were important, like taking care of my mother, being home and taking care of the health of my family, and things like that. And so in finding that outer purpose, I figured out what wasn't working in my life, and I really was able to pare down a lot of things and go, why am I doing this? This is not important to me anymore. But I was still doing things that maybe they were important to me a long time ago, and not so much now, or whatever. So I thought that was kind of enlightening there. And then when the ego is no longer running your life, once you kind of figure out, you've started to awaken and your ego is not running your life anymore, then you become able to live with uncertainty. That was interesting as well. And when you live with uncertainty, then infinite possibilities open up in your life. And I don't know, that kind of happened with me too, because COVID caused a lot of uncertainty. It's still taking an effect in my life. I still have a lot of uncertainty. My husband's job, what's the future going to hold, all these things. And so, but I've kind of, through being able to live in the now, I've kind of learned to tolerate that uncertainty. And this was another interesting thing that somebody else, and I can't remember if this was part of Tolle's book, because it's been a while since I remember reading it, but somebody was talking about chronic pain and how once you learn to live with the pain, once you learn to accept the fact that the pain is going to be there, then the pain doesn't really bother you that much anymore. You just kind of accept it. And that was the way that the uncertainty was. At first, this COVID stuff made me very nervous, and my husband's part-time work made me nervous. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I don't want to be poor again. I don't want to, what are we going to do if you lose your job? That kind of thing. And eventually I just kind of learned to say, well, whatever happens will happen and we'll get through it. And that's, once I accepted the fact that I can't know what's going to happen. Yeah.
So this is a really brutal example, but think about if you're in a car wreck, right? You see that crash that's imminent. You are about to run into the vehicle in front of you. If you tense up, you are going to have more injury. Yes, you're going to have more injury to your body, but if you are not tense, then your body is able to roll with the punch or flow with the wave.
Yes.
And you're more fluid, you don't sustain as much of an injury.
That's absolutely true. Yes. And Tacitus, he quotes Tacitus here, and he says, the desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That is crazy.
Playing it safe.
Yeah. If you're playing it safe, you
won't take the risk.
You can't explore. You can't take the risk. You can't make the discovery. Columbus sailed the 7 seas, he took the risk. The Nordic explorers that came to America, the people who crossed the Bering Strait,
the people who landed on the moon.
Yes.
Just going into a rocket into space.
You cannot do anything like that without letting go of that desire for safety. And that desire for safety is part of the ego. The ego wants to play things safe. The ego wants to be safe to protect its own existence.
Prevent injury or pain.
And so it when uncertainty, let's, I want to, if you're living with uncertainty, I don't know if my husband's going to have his job next week, much less next month, So, if that is just totally unacceptable to you, then it's going to turn into fear. And fear is a destroyer, totally a destroyer. You cannot live in fear all the time because it will destroy your body. It will destroy your mind.
It physically can cause things to happen to you.
But if you can learn to let that uncertainty be acceptable, which is, like I said, this is kind of what I have done. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll figure it out.
One of the ladies that's doing One Little Word this year, her word was trust. Trusting herself. I think that's her word. She may have open. Her word is open.
Open.
But what I get from open is she's open to possibilities, as in she is trusting the universe, trusting herself, because she second doubts herself because she's afraid she's going to make a bad choice, and then she dwells on it.
Yes.
And sometimes you just have to trust yourself and trust the process.
Yes. Yeah, you have to be open to things or whatever. And uncertainty, if you can let yourself be okay with uncertainty, then it turns into increased aliveness, alertness, and creativity. Creativity comes from that openness, that trust, that allowing uncertainty to be acceptable. The painter doesn't know how the painting is going to turn out. He may have a vague idea, but there's still some uncertainty. He's just doing his creating. And the beauty comes because he is open to just doing what feels right in the moment. And, it's hard to let go of that and be okay with the uncertainty. It really is. I'm not going to tell you that there aren't a few days when I go back to the fear. Oh God, what's going to happen if my husband loses his job, because we won't have insurance anymore. I'm self-employed. I don't have insurance. I have insurance through him. And we're both older. He's over 60 and I'm nearly 60. And we both have medical problems. So that's uncertainty is kind of troubling. But I let it go. And anytime I start to have that uncertainty and start to worry about it, that's when I tell myself, just let it go. I can deal with this. I'm okay with it.
Amber, do you ever have any times where you have to talk yourself out of being afraid of something?
I mean, I have social anxiety, so sometimes I have to talk myself into leaving the house.
Yeah, because your ego is telling you
or
this might happen if I go out.
Calling somebody that I've never called. I have big social anxiety whenever I have to make important phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly where that comes from. The fear is from the anxiety, and fear is from that uncertainty of not knowing exactly how and there's a lot of people who have anxiety or like me, I have ADHD. If I have to make phone calls to strangers, I often rehearse that whole process over and over in my head before I get up the nerve to make the call. And that's where that, if I could learn to be okay with the uncertainty and just wing it, it would be a lot easier for me to make those phone calls. But, that's just not always the case. He talked about a little bit about, he had a lot of uncertainty in his own life, because, he was, I think it was Cambridge. He was he had a very, what he calls promising academic career, in England. And he just gave it, he had an urge to give that
to America, right?
Yes. And he moved, to America and became a spiritual teacher. And, he said at the time that he did that, he had no income, no home. He lived on his savings. He was about to run out of his savings, and he played a lottery card and won $1,000, and it let him keep going. And that was when he wrote his book, The Power of Now. That creativity came out of that uncertainty that he was in. And The Power of Now was the predecessor to A New Earth. And I have not read The Power of Now, but I'm betting it's just as powerful as this book was, because now has been the most powerful word I've dealt with in a long time, and it kind of is a magical word because it changes everything.
Yeah, I feel like, I know we had talked about like, oh, what's our word going to be next year? I've been thinking about mine since I started this word, because I picked a work word this year, and I've been like making myself work by using rise as my word. And I decided that next year I want to choose the word enjoy, because I feel like that your word, just you having that word, I keep seeing it everywhere too. And I think about like the word enjoy, because that is kind of like, you know, accepting now. And
it is,
for me, like, I don't just want to accept what's happening now. I want to be able to enjoy it too for what it is.
Yeah.
And so even the things that aren't fun, like the work things, because I think that's why I struggle with my word being rise, because I call it a work word, because I'm trying to force myself to do things that I don't, you know, air quotes, enjoy. And I would like to be able to just enjoy things for what they are, instead of think about them as discomfort.
Right.
Because like when I talk to my therapist, you know, we talk about, you know, like what holds me back from doing things that I want. Mine isn't necessarily like fear, but she called it pain avoidance. And it's not like physical pain avoidance, but just pain, any type of discomfort. Right. So like I always end up letting like my driver's license expire or my registration on my car, because I avoid going to those places.
And we've talked about that before on the podcast.
Yeah, to take care of those little things in business.
Because it causes discomfort to have to wait in line to do those, you know, to do those things. Me,
it's not, I don't even think it's waiting in line. I think it's just like
getting out of your schedule.
It's fear. It's like, I don't know, you're going to like fill out these forms and it's confusing and it's aggravating. Like I literally went to go get my passport a few months ago, and I showed up for my appointment and they told me I was 5 minutes late, so I couldn't get it done. And then they were like super rude to me. And then I was like, this is why I don't do these things, because I literally took the day off of work because they're only, you know, it like, see, it gets me like riled up.
Yeah.
And, you know, I told her like, that's why my car registration always expires, because I'm avoiding those things. And like, I wish to just someday be able to enjoy doing those things, because I'm accomplishing something and I'm taking care of something.
Well, that goes back to one little word and a prompt we had back in July about little wins.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking to my therapist. We actually have the same therapist, so
she's awesome.
She is
just
awesome.
Saying.
But we were talking about the documenting little wins, and one of the things that she talked to me about was to do some of those little uncomfortable things so that I could write them down as a little win. And then it makes a motivation for me to do those uncomfortable things, because there's something
to
in it.
Them off on your list. Yeah.
And I thought that was a kind of an interesting approach to that. But you know, we talked about avoiding things or whatever and doing hard things. But looking at it from that different perspective. Don't look at it as something that you have to do, but look at it as something you get to do and that you are choosing to do. And then it's a win. Just changing, reframing the way you think about it, it changes your attitude about it. It really does. So he actually goes in, when he's talking about this, he starts, he talks about some people don't have a drastic change when they start to view things that way. I don't think mine was a drastic change either. I think mine was just a slow realization that if I could put myself in the now, right now, and just enjoy where I'm at and enjoy what's happening right now, that my perspective would change. But he says also that some people don't change what they're doing, but how they do it.
Right.
So like you're not doing it because you have to, or because you're already headed that way, or you do something because you're afraid. But what they're doing is already a perfect way to bring their consciousness into the world. I thought that was an interesting thing. He starts to talk also about something that it made me think of Star Wars because it's almost like George Lucas kind of had a Eckhart Tolle. Maybe they're friends. I don't know.
Who knows?
It was kind of interesting. But he's talking about inner alignment with the present moment, opens your consciousness and brings it into alignment with the whole. And he's talking about the totality of life. What he's talking about, he says that everything in existence is interconnected, part of the whole. And the reason I say that made me think of Star Wars is because they talk about the midichlorians in Star Wars are part of everything. Mm-hmm. And that people who are sensitive to the Force is the midichlorians or whatever, and they can sense those in all other living beings and
because
stuff.
they're like connected.
Because they're all connected somehow. And Tolle's talking about something, similar. We're not talking about midichlorians actually, but he says that everything that is in existence is interconnected. It's part of a whole. We aren't just a person on the earth. We are part of an ecosystem of our neighborhood, of our city, of our state, of our country, of this hemisphere, of the earth, of the solar system, of the Milky Way galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
It's
the universe.
We are. Everything is connected to the other, and if one thing changes, it could have repercussions.
Butterfly effect,
whatever. He doesn't say that much,
yeah.
but that that it really does make me think of that. And he says, he talks about this in the earlier chapters about when we are in our ego, we label things, we separate things, we divide things, we categorize things, and we use the limited perceptions of our senses. This smells like this. I see this. These are the black cars. These are the white cars. Those are the red cars. This sounds like this. This smells like that. And, everything is separated. These kind of people, that kind of food, those sorts of houses. They're all categorized, and everything is separate. Nothing is, I'm me, you're you. But when we are fully present, when we can perceive what's around us or whatever without interpreting or labeling, and we talked about this before too, mm-hmm. about labeling things, we can sense the deeper connectedness of seemingly separate things. When you are out of your ego, when you are fully present, you can look at another human being and realize all the ways in which you are connected. I think travel is one of the things that does that for people. When you travel the earth, you realize that we're all just humans, and I am not that much different than the grandma in Pakistan who's taking care of her family. I am not that much different from the soldier in Russia who is involved in the fighting in the Ukraine.
Just following orders.
We are just people, and we're all connected to the earth, to each other, to the whole.
We're all a part of the machine.
Yes, yes. And so compulsive thinking, if we're always just thinking, then we're always just cutting things up, putting reality in these little bite-sized fragments. We everything is labeled. These are the good guys. Those are the bad guys. This is the future. This is the past. This is, my boss. These are the people I don't like. Whatever. And we're labeling things, and we're making like these little chunks of lifeless fragments. And he talks about how all of this connectedness, when you can look at things without labeling it, without thinking about it, without trying to define anything, when you just accept that everything is, then you can see that everything comes from the source. And he calls it that. Some people call it God. Mm-hmm. But he calls it the source, and he defines it as the timeless intelligence that manifests as a universe unfolding in time. Because our universe is because our universe is unfolding in time. It's expanding. And so he's talking about the source is the whole. It is where everything comes from. And he talks about the whole is made up of existence and being, the manifested and the unmanifested, the world and God. And when you become aligned with that whole, you become a conscious part of the interconnectedness of the whole and its purpose. You are allowing the consciousness to emerge into the world. And when you're aligned in that way, then oddly enough, spontaneous, helpful things happen to you. And we've talked about this too. When you're in that alignment, when you are that happier person that's in their right place, emotionally and whatever, then those chance encounters and coincidences and synchronicities all seem to just happen because you are connected. You feel that connection, and you kind of will those things into being in a way, because you are part of the source. You are part of the whole. And Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung actually called that kind of synchronicity a causal connecting principle. An acausal connecting principle. Which means that there's basically no causal connection. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that caused those things to spontaneously happen more frequently. They just happen. And it's an outer manifestation of that underlying intelligence. And our minds just can't understand it. We aren't evolved enough to understand how it all works. Mm-hmm. But nature, if you look at nature doesn't have to understand it.
Mm-mm. It just goes.
It just is. Nature is unconscious of the whole, but it's still part of the whole. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how during the big tsunami that happened in 2004, hardly any animals died. there were hardly any animals that died. They somehow sensed that the tsunami was coming, and they all went to higher ground, if they could. But he talks about how they really didn't think about going to higher ground at all. What they really did was they just suddenly realized they're moving to higher ground because they did it unconsciously. They didn't think, oh gosh, a tsunami is coming, I got to get up to the top of the hill. They just found themselves going to the top of the hill because they're in tune with the whole. They just innately knew that was what they had to do.
And they followed like their instincts.
Their instincts, yes. And humans don't follow their instincts. We don't listen to our intuition.
We listen to our ego.
We listen to our ego, and our egos tell us, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, blah, 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 blah. And, that's, our ego's wrong most of the time. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, because our ego would say, don't run away to the hill, you'll lose everything.
Yeah, yeah. Think about the people who stayed in New Orleans and died. There were many, I got to protect my house. But that's from the ego. And
fear of losing
what they had. Yes. That's that fear of uncertainty again, too. But that's where he wrapped up chapter 9, just talking about that whole and how we are all a part of it. Hey friends, this is Cindy. As you can see, this conversation lasted a lot longer than we anticipated. At the 1 hour mark, we had barely covered chapter 9, and we still had chapter 10 to go. So we kept the record button going, but I decided to cut this into 2 different episodes. So if you'll come back tomorrow, we'll have another new episode, and we will finish out chapter 10 of Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. Thanks for listening.